What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. That's me. We got a great Wednesday show for you. We recorded a Wilder Wednesday with our good friend Charlotte Wilder. We talked some Celtics and Knicks action from last night in the NBA, Commissioner's new comments about the mid-season tournament that he's all jacked up about, and some exciting news out of the NFL. But we did record before the suspension for Draymond Green came down, so did want to make sure we got that in here. Anyone missed it, the league announced that Draymond Green would be suspended for Game 3 coming up on Thursday as Golden State heads back to chase down 0-2. Critical juncture, huge blow for their team. Another instance of Draymond Green missing in a pivotal playoff moment in a way that's going to absolutely adversely affect Golden State and certainly affect this series. And that part's a bummer. It's the reason I wasn't rooting for a suspension, because I don't want anything to take away from what Sacramento's doing. They've played incredibly all season and through the first two games against the defending champion Warriors, and this feels like a built-in excuse, but I can't get mad at the league for doing this. I understand why. I have zero problem with them handing down the suspension because Draymond was way too clear and obvious with this. They're always going to catch the second person in an altercation on court. I get that Sabonis is not innocent in all this, but one certainly outweighed the other in the way it looked on the court and the reaction we got. And the league even cited Draymond Green's history of unsportsmanlike acts as a part of the reason for this suspension, which is basically them saying, yeah, we're showing our work in proving that we can legislate intent here. You don't get the benefit of the doubt if you're Draymond Green, even if it weren't already on a playoff platform at a game where the commissioner was there. It was all too clear and obvious. We just saw the Mavs get fined for tanking very publicly in a way that didn't even try to hide it by the league. And this is another example of that. I've done a bunch of dirty stuff that I don't always feel great about at the bottom of piles on the football field. But you know not to do it where everybody can see it. And for Draymond Green, who has a history as an instigator in this league, who knows good and damn well they're always going to catch the second person, to then make it that clear and obvious, you give the league the opening to do this, and now your team's going to be without one of their best defenders going back home down 0-2 in this series. So that's the latest with that. Stick around here. We got Charlotte Wilder coming up for a great show today. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. That is me. With me, back for another Wilder Wednesday, Charlotte Wilder. Charlotte, how you doing?
Michael, fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. We got a great show for you guys today. As always, download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Make sure you are also checking out the wilderthings.substack.com. Ironed it out this time. Got it better this time, Charlotte. Feeling pretty good about the promo.
You did an incredible job, Mike. Thank you. It's so lovely of you to promote it. Anytime I see somebody sign up, I feel incredibly grateful because it's sort of a funny thing to just like email people my thoughts.
Well, all of this is really intimate. Like, even getting into podcasting the way we've done on this side is so much different than radio and TV and all the big box stuff I did at ESPN, where everyone's going to come there regardless and you just happen to be there.
Right.
People got to actually choose you. So that's pretty gratifying. And shout out to everyone that has. We love you. I appreciate you.
Yes, totally. It's like, oh my God, you guys are here. It's so corny because, you know, people always be like, I'm so grateful for everyone who listens or and it's like, no, but seriously, because if you don't, we're not here. So thank you so much.
If you don't, and I've always stressed this to people, I am good at about two things: moving stuff and talking. And I already missed out on the opportunity for people to pay me to move stuff in football. And so now if people stop paying me to talk, I am really up shit's creek. So thank you all for continuing to fund this endeavor.
Can you talk while you move stuff?
Honestly, that one is kind of a sore spot for me, or a blind spot for me, because even walking, I find this out because I live at the top of a hill right now. Every time I want to come back up from the beach, I got to walk up this hill. And the other day I had a friend in town. We were walking back up and I was consistently out of breath the entire time on the way up. So an incline counts the same as carrying something, which all means I'm going to be out. I had to help a friend move a coffee table into her apartment the other weekend. And as I got to the top, I, who have been working out, trying to get ready for hot girl summer, doing all these things right with my body, as soon as I had to pick something up and carry it, I immediately was reduced to ash. So no, not good at talking and carrying things. Are you?
No, I don't carry things. Are you kidding me?
What would you describe, Charlotte, as your skill set? Like, what are the things you know without a shadow of a doubt you can do?
I know that if you put me in a room with people I don't know, I'm going to have a pretty good shot of having a good conversation with them. I'm great with strangers right off the bat for the most part. Decent at talking, decent at writing, and really good at training dogs. And other than that, I think I don't think there's anything else I would put on my resume as like could do this as a job.
Training dogs, what's your specialty? Like, what are the things you can immediately get someone's dog to do if you've got enough time?
It's okay, Mike. There's a basic tenet, which is you can't repeat the command. You can't be like sit, sit, sit. You have to say sit. If they don't do it, you make them do it, give them a treat, and then you say, okay, and then release them from the command. I mean, it's just like, there are people who dog train for a living. This is really insulting to them to insinuate that I could even approach their level of greatness.
Why? But that Caesar guy on Animal Planet or whatever who just imitates the bite of a larger dog doesn't have sole propriety over dog training. You're allowed to blaze a trail here.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I guess I would say that like professionally I can talk and I can write. And like make a fool of myself on camera if you need like physical comedy. And then like on the amateur level, I can train your dog.
Honestly, that's a powerful one, and one that, I don't know, is a service a fair amount of people, I wouldn't say need, because a lot of people take their dog to puppy school or get them trained wherever they like kennel them. But more often than not, it's just a thing you get to flex on other people when you're around them and their dog, with you and your dog. Because there is few things more humbling than having your dog, who is unable to do anything training wise, meet up with someone who's got a really smart, well-trained dog. Because it's just a reflection of you. The dog didn't do anything. It's purely on you.
Yeah, I also want everyone listening to know I don't have a dog, so this is all pure conjecture.
Wait, so how do you know this?
Because I'm good at periodically training my parents' dog.
Oh, okay, so you've got some experience. I thought you just completely pulled this out of your ass. I was very confused for a second.
No. Grew up with dogs, always had dogs.
Okay.
I still consider my parents' dog sort of my dog, but she's not. She's their dog. She's technically my sister, as a vet once told me. So that's where my experience comes from. I'll tell that story another time. This is too many stories. There's too much sports to talk about, Mike.
A vet told you were your dog's sister. Not inaccurate. As someone who considers themselves a dog uncle, that makes sense. You are right, though. We got a lot of sports to get to. Plenty of stuff in the NBA. Adam Silver trying to make fetch happen. Some exciting news out of the NFL that we definitely want to take the time to celebrate. But Charlotte Wilder is, among many things on this show, as we said, great talker, great writer, all those different things. She is also a diehard Knicks and Celtics fan. And so as we record this podcast after the Knicks suffer a very gross setback against the Cavaliers, but the Celtics get another big win at home against the Atlanta Hawks. Charlotte, how are you weathering the storm, balancing your two great loves?
I'm going to kill you. I am not a Knicks fan. This is a narrative we need to correct immediately. I am engaged to a Knicks fan, which means that I have to, and I live in New York, which means I'm surrounded by it, and I can't avoid it, but I'm a Celtics fan. Does it help my case that I'm going to the game on Friday? No, it doesn't. Am I aware of that? Yes, I am. Am I going to wear green socks? Yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I'm not a Knicks fan. I just have to watch them a lot, and maybe I have a little sweet spot for them. Okay.
Understandable. The Knicks are one of the teams everyone likes when they're good. The fact that you think Madison Square Garden is the superior home destination is what established all of this. You can't take that back. That's on wax. We've got the proof.
I know.
But that being said, so you were watching with your fiance, you were watching with other Knicks fans. How did they digest watching Tom Thibodeau continue to wage war on players' bodies at the end of the games? We've got a game that is fully out of hand with about 4 or 5 minutes left, and you've still got Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle, plenty of starters in the game, and then we get Julius Randle going up for a layup, gets contested on the other side by the Cavaliers. I think it was Allen that went up.
Yep.
And It was probably a little borderline of a play at that point. Allen claimed that he was going to contest the shot, but it ends up undercutting Julius Randle a little bit. Lands right in his hip, and TNT, y'all are sick for this, immediately rotates the camera over and says, they've got Derrick Rose on the bench, who Thibs was coaching in 2012, who famously had him in a game that was out of reach far too late and began the cascade of knee injuries that ultimately undermined Derrick Rose's career. TNT, you're not slick for that. That wasn't cute, but it did underscore a point here. So how were the Knicks fans in your life digesting yet another moment of Tom Thibodeau-ery?
Not well. I was watching with my fiance and his brother and his fiance, which is, we all need to get married to it, can just be brother-in-law because those are way too many words, who are all absolutely lovely people. And they were very calm. I was very impressed. I was telling them, I was like, I'm really impressed with how you guys are handling this. And they were like, look, the Knicks won in Cleveland. And so this is basically like if they won 2 on the road, I mean, that's almost unheard of. What the Kings did against the Warriors is just like unbelievable. So they were feeling okay about it. And then the Randall thing happens, and it's just like a lot of hands on heads and like yelling at the television. And then like the replay comes on and it just gets worse, and everyone being like, what are you doing? It's impossible to understand as a fan sitting on the couch watching a coach make a decision that is so, like, without a doubt boneheaded. You know what I mean? Where you're just like, I can't begin to fathom what this man is thinking, except the only thing that I could think Thibs thinks when he does this routinely over, decades almost at this point, is like, does it look like I'm giving up if I pull the starters? Does it look like and it's like, dude, you already gave up. You gave up when the Cavs went up literally 30 points on you. And when like Josh Hart is taking basketballs to the back of his head from another, Julius Randle literally slapped Jalen Brunson by accident.
Yeah, there was a lot of people between both games getting hit in the face.
It was a disaster.
Every time I was flipping channel, someone was getting hit in the face. And so you're right. You gave up when Darius Garland decided to go God mode and just drop dimes all over you. You gave up 107 points in this game. You gave up. The game was over. It wasn't going to happen. And listen, your fiance is absolutely right. They did their job. Stole one on the road. That's all you need to do. You flip home court advantage. It's the cliche. It's basically a sports talk radio segment at this point. Has the series started? Has the road team won? And if so, then we know the series hasn't actually started.
House money, baby. House money.
Right. They got house money right now, and it's frustrating with Thibs because his justification is his way has gotten him to this point consistently over time. And when you've got something reinforced, as really an athlete, a coach, a human being, when something gets reinforced, it's like me who used to procrastinate on tests. If I walk in and get an A the next day, there's no incentive for me to do anything differently because I'm constantly being rewarded for the same behavior. That's a bit troubling. And for Thibs, it's grinding people into dust. We have known him to be this. He comes from a long line of coaches across sports like this. Jim Harbaugh was famous for this during his run at Stanford, during his time in the NFL with the 49ers, as a guy who is a professional jackhammer. And that's what Thibs is. And that's why these usually have a shelf life at whatever his stops or whatever his places are. So it's one moment. Thankfully, it didn't result in anything as catastrophic as what we've seen in the past, but it was a reminder of what's always possible when he's your head coach.
He hasn't won a championship though?
No, not as a head coach, at least.
Not as a head coach. And I would argue that you can't be that reckless. Like, you can't be that reckless no matter what. Like, even if he had, it's just such a dumb, it's so dumb. It's so dumb. And even if you could argue that, like, oh, well, wait, what? What have you just discovered?
Charlotte.
What?
Thibs won a championship as an associate head coach for the Boston Celtics in 2008.
Holy shit.
The plot, it thickens. And he was born in New Britain, Connecticut. Connections abound for Thibs. This is incredible.
He was, how did I forget that? Oh, Mike. Oh my God. Okay, well,
no,
it didn't go well after that. It didn't go well after that.
And he didn't do it as a head coach.
No,
to quote
associate.
do it in the playoffs, do it as a head coach. Associate doesn't count there.
No. You are not the one driving that car by yourself, essentially, even though you're never really driving the car by yourself when you're a head coach. But you know what I mean? I just think that it's there's no excuse for that repeated pattern. Also, though, I mean, the players got themselves into this situation. Like, they played absolutely horribly. It was embarrassing. I don't understand. You know, I have the Celtics going on one screen, the Knicks are on the other, and this I'm like, oh, cool, the Celtics just won. Like, they were comfortably up mostly 10 or 20 points the whole game. And then the Knicks are just like absolutely melting down. And people were talking about the officiating. Okay, sure. The officiating isn't going to give you 30 points.
No, not on the night where overall, like, so Darius Garland finished the game with 32 points.
What did LeVert have?
LeVert ended up with 24 points. And so you had role player going off, Karis LeVert with 24 off the bench, Garland getting hot, and you know Donovan Mitchell's going to have a couple of offensive explosion games. He's good for all those, but making sure, Darius Garland continues to go. That backcourt has been super potent for them all season long, and then to get a Karis LeVert game like that absolutely makes a world of difference. Absolutely understandable at home. That's where role players are supposed to do this stuff, but the Thibs thing is interesting because we mentioned it's a pattern of behavior, and this postseason seems to be a lot of people with built-up patterns of behavior that just have us inclined to ignore it between this, which will be forgotten in a day because nothing came of it, nothing happened, between Draymond Green, who it doesn't sound like will be suspended for Game 3 coming up tomorrow night or Thursday night, I forget which. Or tomorrow night is Thursday night. Either way, Game 3 coming up for them doesn't look like he'll miss, as Draymond Green does yet another kind of suspect thing in the postseason. And then Russell Westbrook going in and just getting into a verbal altercation with a fan on the way back to the court at the half was wild and seemed like such a blip on everybody's radar because Russ is this fiery competitor and we're used to him especially speaking up on apparently the fan in the area. So there's a small cut through from the locker room back to the court that apparently a lot of coaches and players use that does have some fan access over there. And they're not alone in that. There's plenty of stadiums, NFL stadiums, where have you walk right through a concourse with lots of fans. But apparently one of the fans yelled out Westbrook, which we've heard Russ in the past give very stern lectures about taking his name and twisting it up that way, even though he did shoot 3 of 19 in that game. And so he went over and started cussing out that fan, and nothing's going to happen there, which I understand, but it's just amazing. We didn't even really talk about it all that much as a public because we're so used to Russ just being a guy that doesn't take any bleep from anybody.
That's such a good point, Mike. All of these things, I saw the Russ clip and sort of scroll. I was like, oh, that's sort of weird. Why would you do that? And then kept scrolling. Like, it didn't even register as a reckless thing to do because I think a lot of this has been normalized in a way. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. Like, I have my own feelings about Draymond, which is that, you know, I don't think I can sit here and say that I love taunting or I love a competitive spirit or I love the WWE-ification of sports and then say I hate Draymond Green. I don't know Draymond Green. I can't have that kind of opinion on him. Yeah. I do hate when he harms other people, like physically harms other people and then acts that way. Like, for me, there is a line. I understand why people love him. I understand why the Warriors love him. I understand how he is a glue for that team, how he inspires them with whatever he does. I also understand that he punched his own teammate at a practice. So it's like, I think the most fascinating thing in all of sports to me right now is Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green's relationship, because they say they're very close. There are all these reports of how much they love each other and support each other. I personally know that if I were in their situation, I would be livid at him most of the time. So, but it's those sorts of things that we just have come to expect and accept and be like, Russ is going to go off on someone. Draymond's going to either like stomp on somebody's chest or kick somebody in the nuts. And then like Thibs is going to leave his players in. And that's a little strange.
The Draymond part of it is interesting because I did think a lot about that. And I saw a lot of people saying Draymond just wrote yet another check that Steph and Klay have to go out there and cash. And I think we all can kind of identify. We've all got a friend that's a wild card in our group one who may, when you go out, push things a little bit too hard or engage in behavior that you wouldn't normally engage in, but then is like super sweet with everyone's kids.
Yeah.
You would trust with your life and is great with your parents. We've all got friends like that have that one place they just feel like pushing it over the edge. But I'd imagine there do have to be some days where every once in a while, they would like it to not be made harder than it is. And especially in this case, the rule of thumb generally tends to be in sports locker rooms. And I've heard this in college locker rooms, but definitely in pro locker rooms is, I really don't care what you need to do as long as what you do gets you ready for the game. And as long as you handle your business when we're out there, whether that's at practice or in the game, I want you to be the most you possible if that's what allows you to play the best. But I also need you available. And for Draymond in that moment to get himself in the situation where they were right to throw him out and he gave them the opportunity to, now all of a sudden down the stretch, you missed one of your most important defensive pieces in a game that for a while looked like it could have been winnable when they were able to close that down into single digits. So that's the part where all of a sudden Draymond, as much as, he went over, and the rule is always back each other up in public and then in private have the conversation. He can go over and hype up the crowd. He can go over there and be the heel and do all those things to try and fire up his team. But then it's got to be, hey, guys, that's on me. I needed to be in the game. I needed to be available for you guys, and I wasn't.
Yeah, totally. And I think that there's a level of bravado that I respect. I just think it's almost like I'm not even going to go into, I can't, Draymond is such an enigma to me in terms of how he's been able to, I guess it's like the price you pay almost for doing business with him. Like he'll win you championships. He's also going to maybe make you lose a game on the road to the Kings, which, like, if you weigh those two things out,
he's been way more good than harm for that.
Exactly. So I who am I to sit here and say, like, I think he can be mean, but it just seems like it takes it to this extreme, which is also how I felt about Thibs. I felt like that was mean. I felt like it was embarrassing. The whole thing was a little bit shameful. Like the moment that Julius Randle fell by the bat or slid off of who was it that he went up against? I'm blanking.
I am
he went up against the Cavs player and like sort of
Jared Allen,
and like slid down his back. Meanwhile, like the Cavs bench is in. Robin Lopez with his like graying hair has made an appearance.
I do appreciate that the Lopezes have distinguished so heavily among facial hair and hair on their head to make sure we know which Lopi is which.
Exactly. I didn't even have to Google it. I was like, cool. But there's a moment where Randall, when he fell, on his tailbone again, which we just watched Giannis do, which just seemed like, I know is the most painful thing because, like, I once tried skateboarding and just ate it. But Randall's like next to the court, and there's a fan, I think. I don't think it was a media guy sitting there, and he's got jeans on, and I really clocked that because Randall like grabs this guy's knee, and he's like, it's his mom. He's like holding the guy's knee, and the fan puts his hand on Randall's hand, as in like, it's gonna be okay, bud. And I was like, what on earth is happening? Mercy rule. Get everybody off of this court. We'll see it. We'll see in New York. Let's clean this.
Charlotte,
slate.
That was deeply Midwestern, is what happened there. That was good old Midwestern nice.
Is that just is that like a cultural blind spot for me that I'm so New England I can't imagine anyone just being like nice?
Oh yeah, no, that's like fans in the Midwest, and this is the MO you get almost everywhere. Like, I remember we went down and played on the road at Oklahoma, which is kind of a blind spot, whether it's Midwest or the South. That was a running bit we did for our college football crew all this last year.
Yeah.
Because I think we did 3 games in Oklahoma, and no one really knows. Is Oklahoma Texas? Is it the Midwest? Is it all technically the South?
I saw you did a man on the street thing.
Yeah, and
it's very divided.
we never got consensus. Most people think it's just kind of Texas, which, oh, the irony. But for the sake of this conversation, we will say Midwest sensibilities.
Yeah.
And it was our first time ever playing there during my time at Notre Dame. It was an environment where at that point, I think Bob Stoops had only lost at home in his tenure like 5 times.
Oh,
it was a night game. College game day was there. The whole stadium was striped in their colors. It was awesome. And we ended up beating them pretty good. We put it on them that year. That was one of the games where people started to really buy us. And I remember my parents were walking out after, and they said every single Oklahoma fan they went by, nicest person in the world, congratulated on the win, what a great game. Like, that's just sort of the Midwestern MO.
What do you think is the correct, do you think there is a correct way to be a fan in that sense? Like, do you think it's like ride or die for your team where you're an asshole about it? Or, because I feel like some of the arguments against being nice or like, then you're not a true fan. Do you know? I feel like maybe sports radio, maybe like this whole business has melted my brain to the point where I'm like, can I even admit that I maybe have a little bit of a soft spot for the Knicks because I live in New York and love people who love the Knicks? Or am I just, does that mean I'm a bad Celtics fan? Does that mean I'm a horrible person? Does that mean I shouldn't have a job in sports? Like, where do we net out on this, Mike?
Well, remember when the NFL did that commercial where the family was like a Ravens, Lions, Browns, Packers, something family because they all kept marrying off? I think there's limits, right? Like, having one side team, pretty cool. Now, yours being in cities that are so diametrically opposed, that's a pretty tough one. I would say that one might be a little bit tough, but in general, having a side team, I don't think is all that bad.
Okay, so I just want everybody then to tell me how brave I am for being willing to admit the truth that I think other people might feel and can't admit. I also don't like them in... Like I watched the Celtics game on Sunday and then went to, because I live in New York, a sports bar. They were playing the Knicks and everybody was erupting. Like, the Knicks played great. They, oh my God, Jalen Brunson's like actually showing that this could be the second coming of, like, maybe there's something real here. People are feeling a way they haven't felt in decades at this point, if you're a Knicks fan. And it was so weird to be there as a Celtics fan surrounded by cheering people, because I was like, I don't share in this. Like, I don't care if this guy just made a shot. You know what I mean? But
sometimes it's just fun to run with the crowd in those moments, though.
Oh,
like,
I did.
Again,
I wasn't like, but I also was like, I'm very I'm very self-aware about, I'm like self-conscious about this now. And maybe I'm going to have to write a Substack about it. Maybe I'm going to have to like tease some of this out. And I would love to hear if anybody listening deals with this in their lives. Like, do you, especially like Boston and New York people who are together or like who are best friends or who have a close relationship with, like, what are the lines?
Which has to happen a lot. It's called Connecticut. It's where all of them mash into each other. I know from childhood. So, yeah, anyone who has got experience in having to love your rival or one of your rivals in some way,
or at
let
least
Charlotte know.
Like, watch them and put up with it. I also think that the stakes are so low right now. Like, if somehow the Knicks and the Celtics were to meet in the Eastern Conference Finals, it would be war. Like, there would be no doubt about what camp I'm in, but it's also complicated by the fact that the Knicks have been so bad for so long. And like, if New York basketball were good, it would be good for, there are a lot of layers to this, Mike. This is like a parfait of a sports conundrum. And I know there are people listening who are about to like punch their phones because they can't believe I'm saying this because it's so obvious. And the answer is that you just straight up hate the other team. But let's allow our brains to be galaxy for a moment.
Well, see, I don't think that's always true, because I think there's levels to all of it, right? Usually it has to do with what your interaction's been like with a fan base or with people directly associated with that. Like, for me, when I was playing college football, I always hated Michigan more than everyone else, because their players talked a level of shit that I don't think they deserved based on how they were performing at that point. And so that always got me more revved up to play them than, let's say, USC, who you could argue is a bigger national rival for Notre Dame. Michigan State, who's also got geographical ties, who we've actually played more historically historically than Michigan. Like, I have no trouble rooting for Michigan State at certain junctures, but it's a lot harder for me to admit nice things about Michigan. You brought up one of the things that tends to alleviate that, and it happened when I went to Michigan's campus this last fall to call a game, is when you erase the distance between, you realize there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And that's what happened when I walked around Ann Arbor, is I realized, oh, this place is just like 3x South Bend in terms of size and volume, but it's got a lot of the same Midwest sensibilities and lovely brick and great greenery on campus.
Lovely
It was
foliage.
all there. It was beautiful foliage. It was the Michigan State game too, so we were right near the turn, and I had to begrudgingly admit that they had a lovely campus, and I actually had a really good time there, even though I have difficulty rooting for that football team when I'm not calling their games. Obviously, then I'm going to call the game. I'm going to do them justice.
Of course.
That's probably the closest that I have to what that would be like, is actual hatred, which as a player and as a fan I had for them, versus begrudging respect, where if you go up against someone and you end up losing, you can kind of attaboy one of the people on the other team. Like when Notre Dame played South Carolina in the bowl game, I made friends with so many Gamecock fans around me in the section. We were all giving each other unholy amounts of shit, but having fun, buying each other beers. It was a great time. So that in mind, like when you erase all of the distance, then all of a sudden the lines can start to blur a little bit, which you're engaged to. So that makes sense.
Yeah, there's actually, Beef on Netflix is sort of just about that. It's like two people who hate each other and end up being exactly the same, and it's like, well. Hello, Boston and New York.
That's what I always say about Long Island and Staten Island, but that's a story for another day, I guess. At the Wilder Things on Twitter, help Charlotte out with this so she can flesh this out. Charlotte, speaking of assigning meaning to things, did you see Adam Silver came out talking more about this mid-season tournament that he's been loving on for so long?
I did.
For anyone that's unfamiliar with this, Adam Silver, when the new CBA got passed, got this midseason tournament where the league's divided into 6 pools of 5 teams. The pools will have 4 teams from the same conference. They're going to be designated days during the first 6 weeks of the season where the teams are going to play 4 group games. They'll play each other in that pool once, and then 2 games are at home, 2 games are on the road. The winner of each pool goes to a single elimination stage along with 2 wildcard teams. The semifinals and the finals are then going to be played at a neutral site, and the winning team, every player is going to receive $500,000 each. Now, this is Adam Silver, in his mind, solution for trying to make regular season games more meaningful. He constantly cites European soccer, something we know Adam Silver's been a big fan of for a while, as the reason why he wants to do it. Charlotte, when I heard $500,000, that's a lot of money for all of us. When I heard that for NBA players, I was like, why exactly are they going to give a shit about that?
That's like what Draymond's going to get fined for stomping on sports.
Right.
That's like fun. That's like the jock tax to play a game in California.
They just fined Mark Cuban $250,000 more than that the other day for tanking very obviously at the end of the season. And again, for some players, like, it's always different. For some guys in the back end of the roster, or any of the two-way guys maybe, like, that's still a significant amount of money. But let's be real. NBA's regular season success is about trying to coax your stars into playing more games. And I look at this and go, are the stars going to be required to play in these games? Like we've seen in the PGA, where you've got certain tournaments now under their new structure where the top PGA players have to go and they get basically one miss. And then after that, it affects the bonus pool money that they could potentially collect. Yeah. Because if you're not going to do that, or you're not going to work scheduling wise with the teams so that you can time up with when their stars are going to play, I don't know if you're going to get anything that's going to grossly move the needle a lot more than what we've seen.
I agree. It feels like a Band-Aid to a problem. It feels like giving a toddler candy that they don't really want when they have a tantrum, instead of like addressing the cause of whatever is going on, because the NBA is faced with such an existential problem in terms of load management and, player. I don't like when people say like player entitlement or player empowerment. Yeah. But all of these things have come together to make the regular season a problem. And it's a problem because obviously the arenas need money so that they can keep it. It's like, how does Adam Silver, does he think he's fooling us? I think is my question. It feels like he thinks he's pulling one over on us by like talking about the colored jerseys they're going to wear when they play this tournament instead of talking about like, okay, well, who's going to be required? Is there like, what if it was something a little more significant, like you're playing, the way they try to do in the All-Star game where they used to, of like home field advantage in the playoffs? Like, what if there was something a little more tangible that led to the thing these players care about, which is winning a championship? Like, that's why it feels so completely disjointed from the actual end goal. The regular season exists for the playoffs, which exists to crown a champion, which is the thing that no matter how much anybody says they don't care about their legacy, they do. And that's what you want. And the reason you play is because you want to win. So it's like, I don't quite understand how this fits in to that. And therefore, I don't understand how it's actually a solution.
Right, because like breaking it down, like when you look at what makes a game actually matter, like what creates stakes enough in there. So we've touched on a couple of them. There's got to be some sort of either team goal, individual goal, financial goal, something there that's a driver. So a championship you can win at the end of the season, an off season where you're eligible for a contract extension, any sort of bonus incentives, all of those things. There's got to be a genuine rivalry, so teams that actually don't like each other, some sort of beef that we've seen pop up, the Grizzlies versus basically everybody, but especially the Warriors, on and on down the list. And then maybe limited quantity, because like that's where the NBA's regular season's in trouble. You mentioned they have to play these games to get to a championship, and we still have most of these teams, especially with veteran players who have been to the postseason, not actually giving a damn about the regular season. What makes you think they're going to give a damn? I saw Kevin Clark from The Ringer talk about this, about a trophy or a mid-season tournament that's got no sort of history, no actual cachet built up amongst these players. It's not the same as what goes on when you've got, the Champions League that takes place over the course of a season, or you get the U.S. playing in a CONCACAF tournament, or you get places where there's either you wrapped in the flag or real stakes in a tournament with actual history where you're playing teams from outside of your normal jurisdiction or outside of your normal league. None of those things are really going to exist here. So it's hard for me to really believe that all of a sudden, again, if the financial incentive, so we don't have the championship incentive that I think is going to matter as much, does this financial incentive move the needle enough for most of the guys that matter? And I think the answer to that question is going to be no.
No, because they can make that doing a State Farm commercial for one day where it doesn't risk injury. Like it also doesn't take it just, I don't know. That's why I think what you just said of the stakes not being high enough, there not being history, it feels like he's trying to fool us somehow, or like it feels like it's a thing manufactured for the fans that maybe the NBA believes the fans are going to buy into this and therefore make it mean something. Like that's what I thought when he was touting the jerseys, when he was talking about how it was going to work and who was going to play on what court you're going to be playing. Like that isn't stuff that, in order for something to be truly enjoyable as a fan, it needs to have buy-in. The people who are doing it need to believe in it. Like you don't want to watch somebody half committed to anything. And so I think you could argue that what he's saying is like, we're going to make something that has history. Like anything that has history started off as something that didn't. Like if you don't, the sort of the towel of Rick Rubin of being like, if you don't believe, it'll never exist. And it's like, sure, but I don't think this is the thing that is going to apply to.
No, I just I was talking to someone the other day who brought up like, it would be incredible if you could find a world where all of a sudden you brought in teams from international leagues, from other basketball leagues overseas, that you got to play against these guys. Because we know one thing that drives most of these guys is an undying hatred, especially when we get to Team USA time, to losing to anyone abroad. We've seen whole documentaries made about the teams that had to recover from the shame of losing to some of the teams from other countries. And so things like that, which are never going to happen for all the injury reasons that you mentioned, because money's the motive in this league, lead back to this point. Fan buy-in to me with some exceptions, right? We've seen Golden One in Sacramento. They love the hell out of their team. There are some markets where everyone's just going to show up. For the most part, especially for fan love and for the TV ratings portion of it, getting people to pay attention to the sport, it's about, can I see the best players in big time matchups against the other best players? And if this isn't aligned with a way that works with teams, because as we know, most of the rest schedules are set by teams. They're set by the front offices at the beginning of seasons now, who look at, all right, what's this player? What's his injury history? How are we going to best manage over the course of the season so we can get to the playoffs? Unless you're working hand in hand with that in some way or creating an incentive where they have to play, I just worry that this is going to be something that mimics an all-star game where people are only going to care so much, and that includes the players.
You know what they should do is they should make it a tournament between, you're only eligible if you're not a starter. They should make it like the battle of the greatest bench players, where all of a sudden you have guys who have something really to prove. Either they're young or they've, people have said they're washed up. Like, there's something at stake, and then they get an NBA honor at the end of it. It's like, instead of 6 man of the year being voted on, like, you have to earn it.
I do love the idea, as we also had clutch player of the year given out to De'Aaron Fox, some new award that the NBA concocted, that we could now add this to the list, where it's not quite the G League players, but it's definitely not the starters, and we found that bridge program right in between.
And like, let's just call it what it is, which is that the stars are not going to buy into this, but you know who might? Somebody who has something to win from like a lot of press exposure, or all of a sudden it's like Mac McClung at the dunk contest. Like, nobody needed that more than he did. So like, let's just lean in. I think I just fixed the NBA.
It's gonna be Mac. Oh God, it's gonna be all the bench white guys, isn't it? It's what it's gonna be. You know what? You could call it Bench Mob, which is a cool name, and and they'd have the celebrations down cold because that's what they've been practicing anyway. And it honestly would be a good reminder. You do that, and then also tie it fully back into what we were talking about. Every game, bring one fan out and put him on a team. One fan has to play on each team from each opposing fan base, so you get a full appreciation, because it's the Brian Scalabrine effect, where he used to go to gyms and run one-on-one against random people that would talk shit thinking they could beat him just because he was redheaded and white, and he would just cook these dudes. We need that for the fans that were out there talking to Russell Westbrook. Get them out there, get them suited up with the guys at the end of the bench who they think, oh, I'm better than that, I was one high school knee injury away, and then pros versus Joes their asses into oblivion.
And it's only one, so that you feel the shame as acutely as possible. Only one fan. One guy, you've got like Carl from finance or Carl from accounting on one side going up against a guy who owns an auto body shop on the other side. And they're not allowed to check each other. They've both got to guard and be guarded by an NBA player. And then we let them go. It would be amazing to watch. There we go. Adam Silver, we have fixed the mid-season tournament for you. Please credit us. Yes, please credit us. $500,000 might not be a lot to the NBA players. It's a lot to me. So if you could just send some cash our way when this makes you literal millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, thank you. We would appreciate it very much.
I will send you my ACH number so you can begin the transfer of funds. Charlotte, I did want to give you, before we wrap up the podcast, a chance, because Mina Kimes and I did the Love is Blind recap podcast yesterday here. Everyone, thank you for listening to that. But Charlotte, I saw you wrote about it on the Substack, and as the arbiter of what is and isn't sports, you're, I think, another one of the roles that you're great at. Was born out of reality television being sports. You have declared the Love is Blind Season 4 live reunion officially not sports. Why?
Not sports at all, Mike. First of all, I loved listening to you and Mina talk about it. The behind the scenes intrigue, and I mentioned this to you earlier, but the fact that Chloe from The Perfect Match was the one who was up there saying, please don't tweet about this, or like, this is embargoed. The thought of Chloe from Perfect Match saying the word embargoed is one of the funniest things I can imagine. It wasn't sports because, first of all, it wasn't live. We know this. And it was also very bad. And I didn't even feel like there were very high stakes. I didn't feel like there was anyone I could really root for. I didn't feel, it wasn't fun for me. Like I think that thing that would best sum this up. And I love how you and Mina dissected it and talked about Zach overall winning the reunion, which I'm going to be honest, I don't know that I fully agree with you guys, because I think I think the problem with the Love is Blind reunions is twofold. One, they seem to tape them all in one take, whether they are live or not, from previous seasons. Sure. And Andy Cohen, the king of reunions, Bravo's golden ticket, I heard a clip of him talking about reunion shows, and he said we would never in a million years do one live. He said we could talk for an hour about one dumb topic before we get to something even remotely worth diving into. Or I could say one thing off the cuff that suddenly brings up a bunch of emotion that we need to get through. And they're long. Like, the tapings are long. They give it time. They let it percolate. And then they edit together the best stuff. And I think my point was, in what I wrote, was that these are, quote, normal people. I think you have to be a little bit on the wacky side to agree to have your life filmed. It almost seems less about love or less about fame and more about, like, what trauma can you put up with being exposed for on national television. And I think Love is Blind is, like, the most watched reality show in the world now. And they literally take normal people like Dennis from marketing and just put him in a pod and then suddenly make him one of the most famous people in the world. And I'm like, what are we doing? And forgive me if anybody read my thing, which, I'm sure everybody listening did. But the reason sports are so wonderful is because you're watching the best of the best. And if you're not, that's why you're there. Like, college sports can be wonderful because they allow for these absurd moments, but there's still such a high level of skill. And what we're watching when you watch the actual show is this edited together, very carefully constructed. They'll shoot 300,000 hours. I don't know how many hours are in a year, whatever, like 4 weeks, wall to wall. And then we see 12 of those hours of, 20 different people. And so I think that they didn't account for the fact that these are not people who are trained to talk publicly, as we have somehow found ourselves doing. They are not elite at this. Vanessa Lachey clearly doesn't know how to steer a ship of this magnitude or unwieldiness. And so it seemed like everybody was kind of set up to fail. And that the good guys, like I always end up hating them by the end of the reunion, because they're going so hard. They're like, you were an awful person. And everybody around them is like, yes, queen, go off, tell her how bad she was. And then I end up feeling so bad for the person who was the, quote, villain, whose life we only saw a sliver of, that I'm like, what is even happening?
I will say, I feel like that's where this reunion differed a little bit. Because the only person who was quote-unquote villain status on this that I think really, and we talked about this, got held accountable, was Arena. Yeah. Micah got to skate. Jackie didn't even have to show up, or chose not to show up, however that went down, and got a nice cushy interview with Vanessa that was edited, gave her a pretty favorable light. And then you had Paul, who was basically resisting the urge to throw Micah even more under the bus when he was getting prompted about why he didn't think she was a good mother and why she wasn't nurturing and all these things. It felt like they actually pulled back from a lot of that in a way that actually left me wanting a little bit for some of these people who had their transgressions out here to get a little bit more accountability for what they had done.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. I guess the whole thing, it's not so much that I think that's sort of an overarching problem with them for me, that I end up just feeling like, okay, we get it. I also think people are so complicated that I don't know what I believe from what I was shown. People are saying Micah only wanted to get famous. Micah never intended to marry Paul. Either she's an unbelievable actor and should probably pivot careers and go into being a dramatic actress, or she was actually really upset and overwhelmed by a lot of that stuff. And I think that those it's impossible to know what's real. So we're treating at the reunion, we're treating people whom we knew as characters from what was presented to us as though that were the absolute truth, and then forcing them to answer to it in a way that they almost don't even know how to begin to talk about it because they can't throw production under the bus and say like, well, this was edited this way. They're not going to throw themselves. I would respect it so much more if someone was just like, yeah, you know what? If Mike was like, yeah, I was never going to marry Paul. Just tell us the truth. Netflix is still trying to do this like fourth wall thing where they don't talk about production. The fact that you guys said they told you weren't allowed to tweet about it as it was happening, which would have been the best possible PR to get people to watch it the next day. It's like they are resisting the truth of what this thing has become, which is there is no fourth wall anymore. And just you have to lean into that.
Yeah, it's you saw the parts where it bumped up against that a little bit, and there were some allusions to the editing and some allusions to what part of this was production and just how much we don't see. Like you said, the tip of the iceberg model that we were getting. The one use that I think, the one utility that this definitely has that got a little bit curbed by the host was it does give some of these people a chance to fill in the things that we didn't see. Zach did do a good job of that, talking about car rides with Micah, Paul bringing up the fact that they dated a little bit after, because it's also been a year watching these people try and recollect stuff that they've watched back of their lives, but trying to remember things that happened a year. I can barely remember things that happened a week ago. I can barely remember the stuff about college football that I lived on a day-to-day basis and are the basis for my job now. So I'm sympathetic to the fact that some of this stuff, like Tiff and Brett and Tiffany just looked like they were checked out. Like they didn't want to have to deal with any of this stuff anymore. They're happy. They're far too normal for all of this. And so I could understand and empathize with that a little bit.
Totally. And I liked what you and Mina said about how they almost didn't want the positive attention either. And I don't know, I've experienced in my career like some internet dust-ups where I've been the bad guy and some internet dust-ups where I've been the good guy. And no matter what, it's sort of embarrassing and feels gross, I think. At a certain point, you're all covered in mud. Exactly. It's like, you get it. We get it. Like this. And I think that it's a weird thing to suddenly be that public for all of them, but it's also hilarious that they've been in hiding for a year. And now all of a sudden they're public about something that happened so long ago. And that, I don't know, the whole, it shook me a little bit, I think, because the reunion was not well done. I think you're right. I think Zach, as to the best that he could, he really tried to say you were much meaner than anybody saw. Right. But I don't think besides that, Marshall saying he felt robbed by the experience that Jackie didn't want to go to the altar. I was like, oh, you wanted to get left at the altar? Like that was part of your vision for this? Like you felt robbed that she wasn't there. And I understand wanting that accountability. But the whole thing was just so disjointed and maybe everybody was rattled. But I hope for the next season that they do a reunion where they tape it before and they just really get into it and people don't hold back. Like just tell us how you feel. I think that was my main problem. Everybody was sort of normal in that they weren't totally willing to go there. And you kind of have to. Yeah, I think that's definitely one thing because the season itself, season 4, was a triumph. It was probably my favorite one so far. It yielded you 3 actual couples that got married at the end. And so it does deserve more on the back end. So hopefully they get that right before next year as we get going. I forget where they've taped already, if it's like DC or Charlotte or something. I thought I heard Tampa, but maybe that was a joke. Oh, I did. I think I did hear Tampa. You might be right about that one, which God help us all. Mike, when are they going to do? Sorry, go ahead. If Tom Brady walks into the pods in Tampa, I swear to God. Mike, when are they going to do Boston? Oh, that would be the funniest episode. That would be the funniest season. I would pay a lot of good money for them to set one in Boston or Buffalo, like a thick regional accent. I was just going to say, that's what it is I was looking and trying to think of what would the best cities be, and it's absolutely ones where you've got a very specific regional dialect. And where sports, run the culture. Charlotte, go all the way back to your idea. You do Love is Blind, but you do it where you have fans from opposing franchises. Yes. I think this was the reality show that you sort of came up with on here, a rivalry-based reality show, yes. Love is Blind style, where they cannot talk about the sports team that they root for, and then all of a sudden when they get out, they've got to cope with that reality as they're then thrust into the sporting event. I think that's what you came up with. Yes. Yes, and like maybe you look out and there are two Cowboys fans who fall in love, but like maybe you end up with an Eagles and a Giants fan together. It's the possibilities are, you get sports, you get love, you get, I mean, I'm giving away so many good ideas for free this week.
We've got to cut this off now to make sure that we don't give away any more gold. Again, Netflix, you've got our information, and if you don't, at Gojo Show on Twitter, at The Wilder Things.
Yeah, we're here.
We're here to help you. NBA commissioners, reality television show producers, you want dynamic, we're chameleons. And Charlotte, we're chameleons that are going to get everyone out here on a positive note. Let's get to this, that, and the third. 3 quick ones to end the day on for everybody. And this was really good news out of the NFL. And I think news that surprised a lot of people. Damar Hamlin, who just 3.5 months ago suffered commotio cordis that caused him to collapse on the field in that game against the Cincinnati Bengals, has been officially cleared and announced that he plans on making a comeback to the NFL after being officially cleared. How did that sit with you, Charlotte, after everything that we saw?
I think I want to be careful in how I answer this because I want to honor what Damar wants. And if for him, the ultimate triumph would be to continue doing the thing he loves. And if that is, if not being afraid, if not making it make him timid, if feeling like he got this far, he has so much to prove, he can still play. If that's what in his heart is what's going to fulfill him, then I wish him only the best. I think that players should be in charge of, I don't want to sound like I'm judging his decision. I think it sat weird with me. I'm going to be honest. I think I have a hard time imagining myself going back and doing that. So it's sort of a leap for me to get there. But, you know, if I think about the thing I love doing most, almost taking my life, what is life if you don't keep doing it? You know, I think all I can do is say that I admire it if that is truly what is going to make him happy. I do think that what we saw was so scary that it is naturally going to be jarring to see somebody put themselves again in that situation, but it was also such a freak thing that could happen in any sport to anybody at any time that it's understandable that you knew the risk before, so you keep going after.
Yeah, the condition, according to the American Heart Association, extremely rare consequence of blunt force trauma to the heart that happens at exactly the wrong time in the rhythm of the heart, causing it to stop beating effective. So, like you talked about, it's like a lightning strike. It's incredibly rare to think about. And he said, this event was life-changing, but it's not the end of my story. My heart is still in the game. I love the game. It's something I want to prove to myself, not nobody else. And I'm going to be fascinated to watch this because we heard Zion talk about the mental hurdle coming back from injury. I can't imagine what it's going to be like when he suits up in pads. It's one thing to talk about it, but to go out there and to be back in that same position. And I'd be curious to hear him talk about it because we remember hearing the story. He went down and then woke up in the hospital. And the next time he woke up, he asked, did they win? Yeah. Like that was the first thought that came to his head. And I had a close friend of mine who was in a really bad skiing accident and almost died. And 6 months later, as he made it out, full recovery, was all good, I saw him back on the mountain and I texted him. I was like, is that scary at all for you? He says, like, I don't remember the accident. I don't remember what happened there. Wow. And so I don't have that innate fear of what goes on because it has something I've done for so long. And I'd be very curious for Damar Hamlin what his experience remembering that event is like, because if the moment isn't something that is conscious in your mind or in the back of your head, it might blunt that in a way that's a bit different than a player who suffered, you know, and while they're not as severe, none of the things I'm going to talk about are as severe life-wise, but for an athlete's mind, having reconstructive surgery on a knee or a shoulder where all of a sudden this thing you've been used to using, you can't use in the same way. And when you go back to do the thing that you were doing, you're not able to in the same way. You've got to think about it a little more. I'll be curious if those thoughts creep in because that's going to be the hurdle for him. It doesn't sound like physically he's going to have limitations if he's been cleared. It's all going to be what he can account for mentally. And man, I'm rooting for the guy. Like you said, if he wants it, go get it, man. This is your life. If anyone's got an appreciation for how quickly it can be taken away, it is Damar Hamlin, and that's what he's shown people, and he wants to go chase the dream. Good for him.
Yeah, I also will be interested to see how many outlets race to do the first feature on him, and I hope that he's able to. I sometimes feel weird when people come back from a trauma like this or something, and all of a sudden they're a poster child for something, for someone else's agenda. And I just hope that he's able to work through it. And I'm not saying like, oh, the media is the problem. I'm part of the media. But I guess I hope that he's able to come to terms with it himself, and really figure out how it feels before he has to tell his story, I guess.
Yeah. You hope it gets to be his own. I think that's all we can hope for anybody, and certainly for someone who's been through as much very publicly as Damar's been. You're right. It's going to be uncomfortable for us. The same way watching Alex Smith go back out there and get sacked by Aaron Donald in his first game returning to play after everything we saw his leg go through. It's going to be, I'm sure, weighing maybe even more on fans than Damar, who's going to be back out there doing the thing that for 25 years of his life he's trained and dreamed of doing at the highest level. Charlotte, let's get to that, which mentions one of his teammates in Buffalo, Von Miller. Really interesting article about Von Miller and his quest, his stated goal to become an NFL GM later in his career. Apparently, he has talked about this with Brandon Beane, the GM of the Buffalo Bills, who's brought him to the combine, helped him go through the meeting process, said Von has asked a lot of really detailed questions, and this wasn't just a one-off conversation. So Von Miller, who I think described himself as a football player, a chicken farmer, and a hopeful GM. How does that sound to you, Charlotte, adding that title for a guy who's been one of the best pass rushers in the sport?
I think it sounds great. I've interviewed him a few times, and he's always struck me as very curious, and with a playful quality to him that I think would be super helpful to have in, first of all, I just think anytime players who have been, whether you played 2 snaps in the NFL or whether you've been the leading pass rusher, whatever level of play you have, you understand what it takes. You understand whether you never saw the field, like you have an understanding of what players need, that I think is so valuable when you marry it with what the business needs. And just to have somebody in there who, and not to say that everybody who has been through it ends up advocating for other people who are currently going through it. I think that that's often an easy way to also brush aside criticism, be like, well, we have a former player in here, like we didn't do anything wrong. But I do think that hopefully in the best case, you've got someone in there with just a complete other set of, a completely different skill set and knowledge base. And I don't know. I love when people are willing to say what they want and then ask for help and ask for questions as to how do I do this? Because I think a lot of times people assume that you're supposed to know how to do the thing you want to do, or you're supposed to just figure it out yourself. And that is not how anything works. And the fact that Von Miller's out there being like, hey, while I have you, can you take me with you? I think that takes a lot of courage.
It does, and I'm glad he's also doing it, and we see more guys doing it while they're still playing. Like, we've seen former players become GMs, right? You've had John Elway, Ozzie Newsome was a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest that we've seen, and that perspective, like you said, is something Brandon Beane cited. He said he's going to be able to talk to guys about things in the locker room that me and other guys would never be able to approach in the same way because we don't have that same vantage point. But the difference is saying it and getting a start on it while you're a player. It's the number one thing they tell you at all the rookie symposiums and everything when you're coming into the NFL is you're never more valuable to your next employer than while you're currently employed here, because everybody wants an NFL player around. Everybody wants a pro athlete around. Everyone wants someone that's something else right now because it makes them cool by proxy. There's an added benefit and a glow for them. And while this is inside the sport, it does say a lot about Von Miller and about a lot of players in the way they start to think about life after football. It's really healthy and probably wouldn't have happened X amount of years ago, because for so long, and this is a credit to Brandon Beane too, a lot of organizations are like, this is a transaction. We need you, especially Von Miller, who we paid a ton of money to, who ended up injured last season, to be back out on the field doing everything you can towards that end, seeing everyone involved in this situation. And I get he's a star. People are more willing usually to help out those guys who are the big name guys, veterans, future Hall of Famers, but to still do that is a leap that I don't think we would have seen always years and years ago when this would have potentially gone on.
No, I think that's right. I know I've talked about this before, but when I profiled Chris Long in 2017, when he was, we had already set up this article I was going to write about him, and I show up, and it was the day that he decided that he was announcing he was giving all of his game checks to charity. And I know I've mentioned this story before because he talked a lot about the void of what comes after you play. But he also said something that has stuck with me just in way more aspects than simply sports or simply athletes. He was like, I said, why are you doing this now? And he said, I'm doing it now because once I stop playing, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to pay attention, even an iota, the amount they will pay attention if I, a current NFL player who won a Super Bowl recently, last year, gives all of my game checks to charity. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, the self-awareness it takes to understand your value in that moment. And I think it's just something that no matter what your role is, to know the social capital or the power that you have and then act responsibly instead of manipulatively. And I just think it's nice, as you said, to see people in the organization respecting that as much as fans or people outside of the organization might.
Yeah, incredibly well put. It's very cool for Von. So excited to watch the trajectory, because everyone that was cited in this article, I think it was on Bleacher Report, basically echoed the same sentiment. He seems dead serious about this. He's not joking. He's taking this legitimately, and that authenticity in the approach is something that I think also makes people more inclined to respect and want to help out.
Also, Von Miller, born the exact day after me. Same year.
How about that?
Yeah, March 25th, 1989, March 26th, 1989.
Damn, there we go. 89 babies. Stand up.
Yeah,
God, it's humbling to know that Von Miller is our same age and has accomplished so much. So let's get to young people and feel less bad about that and get to the third. This one, big news. We have had an offseason in the WNBA that's netted us a couple of super teams in Las Vegas and New York. College basketball on the women's side may now be giving us some of that same goodness, because I saw, and I believe this was courtesy of On3, that Haley Van Lith, former Louisville basketball star who entered the transfer portal, is heading on a visit to LSU for sources converged to, Bengal Tiger On3. She was all ACC the past 2 seasons. LSU, the current reigning national champions. Charlotte, this got the making of some college basketball super team. And as we get ready to welcome Paige Beckers back to the sport next year, Caitlin Clark at Iowa back to the sport, women's basketball on both levels has star powers and bundles in a way that I love.
I am so excited. I saw somebody comment, she's the Kevin Durant of women's college basketball.
This is growth.
It is growth. First of all, it's growth. But I said the other day, I forget who I was talking to. It was just a random private conversation. And I was like, God, when Haley Van Lith entered the transfer portal, I was like, oh, I hope she goes to LSU. I was just like, all I want is for Angel Reese and Haley Van Lith to go up against Caitlin Clark. And imagine that. Like it's so good. And then as you said, Paige comes back in. Obviously, South Carolina and the Stanfords of the world, like, you're always going to have these real contenders. But the fact that we have these petty moments to build something dynastic off of, I just couldn't be more excited. I really hope she goes there. I really hope she ends up at LSU.
I want it mic'd up so I can hear her and Kim Mulkey interacting, because I feel
it wouldn't be pretty.
There's a lot of edge to both of them in a way that's going to cause a level of friction that I am going to want to hear as a viewer. So we will send prayers up for that. We'll keep an eye out for that. They're all going to lose to Notre Dame anyway when they're healthy next year. So
okay.
Good luck playing for second place, y'all. Good luck topping this podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out on the DraftKings YouTube channel under the Gojo of Mike Golic Jr. tab. Follow her on Twitter at The Wilder Things. Check out her Substack, thewilderthings.substack.com. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Boom. Money in the bank.